You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Welcome to Volatility Views, the premier program for volatility traders. Each week, we'll take a deep dive into the world of volatility with in-depth analysis, trading activity reviews, strategy breakdowns, cutting-edge education, and much more. We'll also bring you exclusive conversations with the traders, researchers, and asset managers who are reshaping the volatility landscape. If it involves volatility, then you'll find it on Volatility Views. And now, it's time to take a deep dive into the world of volatility. It's time for Volatility Views.
All right, everybody. That music means we are back once again. One final time here for our broadcast week for all of you on demand. Folks, we'll be back, of course, a little bit later on the pro side for a lot of fun there as well. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as from the ever-scintillating, at least we tend to think so, Options Insider Radio Network. Like what you hear, this, any other platform, you know, your Audibles, your iTunes, your YouTubes, wherever you get the show, it's available pretty much everywhere. Throw a like or a comment or a rating or review. The show's been going for a long time. It's got quite the backlog of content out there, but obviously new people discover the show all the time, so new reviews, new stars, new comments, all helps the algorithm continue to recommend it to people. So if you like what you hear, do throw some of that our way. And of course, if you want more content in your lives, you don't want your broadcast week to end with Volatility Views. You want to come back and probably get into some fun trouble with us on Options Oddities as we break down the entire week of madness from an unusual activity perspective and track a whole bunch of trades and see how they're doing. TheOptionsInsider.com/pro, the place to go. Of course, if you like the vol side, we had Scott Nations on our pro Q&A earlier this week, talking a lot of vol, a whole mess of vol on there. So if you like vol, theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go to begin your journey to the vol dark side. And let's see who's joining us on the dark side of vol this week, shall we? First, since we're talking dark side, we have to start in the southern volatility mecca, known as Austin, where we are joined once again by the greasiest of meatballs, Mr. Mark Sebastian from OptionPit.com. Mr. Meatball, welcome back to the show, sir.
Good to be here. I'm excited. It's Friday. This is my favorite hour of the week, Mark. I got to be honest.
It is a fun hour. It is a fun time for one and all. And also joining us to add to the fun, add to the party, he is the options guy himself, also the creator of the Options Playbook, Mr. Brian Overby. Mr. Overby, welcome back to the show, sir. It has been too long.
Oh, yes. Without a doubt, it's been too long. And I love to talk some volatility today and try to figure out, I kind of want to know why is the VIX where the VIX is right now? I'm a little bit confused by that. So I'm excited to explore that question today, Mark.
All right, then let's all find out together, shall we? It is time for the Volatility Review.
It's time to break down the latest developments in the volatility trading world. It's time for the Volatility Review.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Volatility Review, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down the week that was and indeed still is from a vol trading and trending and analysis and unusual activity, all sorts of fun perspectives. And coming into the tail end of the week, the markets are kind of gently drifting north, at least right now. We know if past his prologue, we could whipsaw all over the freaking place by the end of even just this hour. But right now, markets gently drifting north, all of them up about 0.2%, kind of across the board. So strange unanimity across all the major indexes out there. You don't see that too often. Of course, gently drifting into a weekend, coming out of course, a long weekend. So it was a truncated holiday week. No trading on Monday, of course. We are still seeing vol come off a little bit, as you would expect. Weekend gently drifting up. None of the fears, at least, that seemed to be hanging over the market's head just a couple of sessions ago. What's going on with Apple? What's going on with China? All this madness. That was sending markets a little bit to the south and vol a little bit north. We got up to about a 15.5 in VIX cash during the week. Coming back off that now at about a 13.75 when we kicked off the show. That's still up from where we were this time last week. Remember, this time last week, they were just both barrels they were coming for vol. It was kind of impressive how much they just annihilated volatility across the board. Vol came off, vol just fell off a cliff. They were pricing in a whole lot of nothing, quite frankly. And then this week came along and they're like, maybe we need to reverse that a little bit. So we got a little bit of juice back. Again, 13.75 right now in VIX cash, up about 0.6 points. So a little bit frothier than we were last week, but again, off of the highs earlier in the week of about 15.5. VVIX, same deal. They got a little bit frothier earlier in the week as well. I mean, we were hanging out right around an 80, close to it on the show this time last week. And during the heights of the sell-off yesterday, got up to almost a 93 in VVIX. Right now, hovering right in the middle there at about an 85. That puts it up almost 5 handles from where it was this time last week. So vol trying to catch a bid, so far at least. Having a hard time sustaining it. And of course, VOLQ, the at-the-money vol of the NASDAQ 100, 17.25 when we kicked off the show, up about 0.5 point on the week. And intra-week, it got up to about 19.25. So we're about 2 points off the high right now. So intriguing stuff. Vol came and then it went this week, as it is wont to do these days. Brian, as our guest, we'll start with you, sir. What is catching your eye out there in the markets, and what do you make of all this vol madness we're seeing out there, sir?
Well, it's just a ho-hum attitude of the market is what the VIX is showing me. As a matter of fact, I've on a few of my trades that I've talked about over on Options Guy TV, I've actually been wrong about the VIX. I really anticipated going into the Fed meeting, going into the budget talks by the government at the end of September, that we would see vol drifting higher as we got into September and head into October. The seasonality of the marketplace, usually if you go back about, since the VIX was being calculated, since they changed the calculation in the VIX, normally September and October, you see the VIX rise substantially relative to July, and we're just really not seeing that this year. So I think that's a little befuddling to me more than anything, is to see the VIX at these levels, even though we've had the last 4 days in a row. The NASDAQ has been down. We've seen weakness in the Dow across all markets, including, the behemoth, Apple, and their little war with what's going on with China right now. So very surprised to see the VIX at these levels, and was not anticipating that. That simple.
Yeah, they really just came for it with both barrels, just annihilated all the vol out there over the last couple of weeks. It has been fascinating to watch. A little bit of, like I said, a little bit of juice sneaking back in this week, but once again, the vol upside is short-lived. It makes it so challenging out there if you got the vol upside, listeners. We've said it many times on this show. You usually have to get out while the getting is good. Mr. Meatball, a lot to unpack this week. We had some vol, and then they took it away again. What's your take on the week that was and indeed still is from a vol perspective, sir?
Well, Apple took it on the chin, but money flowed into other places where Apple was dying. We've seen energy just go, not parabolic, but have a really nice week. We've seen NVIDIA get sold, but then what do? They buy AMD, they buy Intel. The money is not leaving the market, it's moving around. And so the trade is more a rotation trade than it has been a go to cash trade this week. Now that's led to the S&P being slightly down on the week because the tech heavy names are so big in market cap. But it has not been kind of the bloodbath people were waiting for. And, Walmart kind of all companies kind of saved the stock market. I feel like yesterday, which was Thursday, when they announced that they were lowering payments for lowering the entry level salary for upcoming hires. That sent Walmart way higher, sent the whole retail space, sent restaurants higher, and sent treasuries higher because wage inflation, that's the first real chink in the armor we've seen of wage inflation waning.
Yes, fascinating stuff out there. And what's catching your eye on the VIX and vol front, sir?
I mean, VIX, like you said, it went up and then went right back down. Mark, I will tell you, remember I did get to sell my 13.5 puts up at a quarter. They're back down to about 15 cents. I just delved into some 14 puts today, buying them for about 30 cents. I think those are way too cheap given where volatility is, where the VIX is. I think VIX is primed to maybe make another run at a 12 handle here between now and early next week if there isn't a little bit of follow through sale in Apple on this little dead cat bounce.
Yeah, after we did option block yesterday, between option block and TWIFO, I did go scoop some 15 puts for going out next week. You're right, I'm with you. It looked a little top heavy out there. It seemed like the reversion was kicking in, and lo and behold, at least so far, it has out there. So we've seen this movie once or twice before, Mark, at this point. So it makes it a little fun out there on the vol front. Let's keep rolling out there to the land of the volatility surface. And what's going on out there right now, listeners? It's kind of shrugging its shoulders. It's kind of like, we're kind of hanging out close to where we were this time last week. In fact, the front portion of the curve up a whopping 1/10 of a point when we kicked off the show, both in September and October. When was the last time we saw the front portion, the highly volatile portion of the curve, that muted, listeners? But right now, net on the week, a whole heck of a lot of nothing. If you go out to the beginning of next year, that's when we've been looking for a while and saying the market is pricing in a little bit of juice, a little bit of inflection out there late in Q1 into Q2. You're talking the March, April, May timeframe out there. You're not quite at a 20 anymore in that May future. We're really close, 19 3/4. So you came off about a little over a quarter of a point. It was just a little bit north of 20 this time last week. So we're still threatening a 20 if you go out into next year, which is kind of interesting. Mr. Bryan, we'll start with you. It has been fascinating to watch the vol surface the last few weeks, what it's pricing in. Also, it's been head-scratching for a while just how much juice they're pricing in the beginning of next year. Has that caught your eye, and does that perhaps give you pause?
Well, like I mentioned on the top of the show, I think my biggest concern is what's going to happen with the budget talks that are going on with the government. The pundits are just starting to talk a little bit about a potential government shutdown, and what obviously that would do if to the recession talks in the marketplace. So going out beyond those dates, looking at VIX and seeing higher implied volatilities, it makes sense to me because of that news. And I think it's major news too, in that McCarthy made some concessions in Congress to try to get his speakership, and one of the biggest things were budget talks and how different parts of the government is going to be approved for the budgets. They, instead of just doing mass approvals, they're going to be looking at things on an individual basis. And I really think that's a nerve-wracking scenario, which is the end of the fiscal year is September 30th. So a new budget starts October 1st. So like I said, volatility, I'm surprised to see that it came off as hard as it did, considering what's going on in the markets, and going out into the future, going out even into the new year, I can see some of that volatility and some of that concern because of these things that I've mentioned.
Speaking of vol futures, we got the numbers in our hot little hands from our friends over there at OCC this week, and they clear a bunch of stuff, obviously equity options, index options, ETF options, all that stuff looking fairly robust. A 1 billion contract month in August, listeners. You don't see that too often, or really ever. It's only our second 1 billion plus contract month in history. 1.02 billion contracts, to be precise, out there. And so a lot of action out there. Weirdly enough, equity options, the one kind of dark spot, they were actually off about 1.6%. So trading on the same level they did this time last year. ETF options up 29.1%. Index options, this is just ridiculous, up 41.4%. That's where all that 0-day action is really kicking in, listeners. Last year was about 63 million contracts. This year, 89. So that's, again, this is August. This is August when vol usually goes to die, when everyone is doing anything else other than slinging a lot of VIX products. And yet we're seeing a lot of paper across the board, a lot of index paper across the board. And speaking of VIX, VIX futures, another product that's had a hard time kind of catching a bid, getting much juice for volume. I know SIBO was really excited with the return of inverse vol. They thought that was going to do it. That hasn't really done it. SVIX, I mean, doing well, but not exactly lighting the world on fire. So it seemed like the futures were kind of caught in this death spiral. And then August comes along, up 24.7% from August of last year. So 4.4 million contracts last year, 5.5 million this year. So VIX futures catching a bid out there as well. Mr. Meatball, does that surprise you that VIX futures were so robust, especially in a period that is seasonally the time when VIX futures go to die, sir?
Yeah, that kind of does surprise me. But, you look at the way August traded. July, we came in pretty darn flat-footed for a vol event, and markets woke up for the first 3 weeks, and we saw some legitimate selling, and so and VIX was so low. Makes a little sense for the hedgers to be in there slinging futures.
Mr. Overby, we haven't chatted in a while, so I'm curious your thoughts, not just on the futures, that's obviously a big one, but also overall options volume in August being so off the charts. I mean, 1 billion contracts in August, sir. Who saw that coming? I know I didn't.
Yeah, I actually made a note of that because I think that's just fun to say, 1 billion. And I did not see that coming, but it does show, well, a lot of leaning towards the indexes, which once again, in the indexes usually see more put options being bought than calls, and like just take a peek at the put call ratio in general. And that type of volume, you would think it might drive some VIX a little bit higher overall, but we're not really seeing that. But I'm amazed by that number, and I love that number. I love that it made it up over 1 billion options, and I mean, obviously, that's job security for us.
Yes, it's a good thing. Rising tide lifts all boats. Now, I right. say that. I talk about all these great volume numbers, listeners, and how robust August was, and here we are coming into the end of the week, and VIX cannot get out of its own way today, listeners. So I set you all up just to let you down. VIX today putting up a whopping 239,000 contracts. Now, it's not 150, so it's something there, but it's not the robust numbers we've seen. Sometimes by this portion of the show, we're up threatening 1 million already if markets are really rocking and rolling, and clearly not doing that today. The ADBE also reflecting that. We were saying for most of August, wow, this VIX ADBE is remaining surprisingly robust. It was right around 750,000 contracts, which, again, this is August. This is not the time when people are usually slinging a lot of VIX options, listeners. Threatening 750,000 contracts in the dog days of summer, that's a lot. It seems like the tail end of August is now catching up with us here in the first week of September, because that's fallen off a cliff, too. Back down to 654,000, so down about 75,000 contracts on the week. Again, that's still impressive volume for this time of the year, but it just shows you how inflated things were back there in August. Let's see what's open for size. What are the top 10 size positions in VIX options right now, listeners? We've been hanging out at this 8-to-2 calls over puts ratio. It seems like forever in the top 10. If you were hoping for a break from that, a respite, you're not getting it this week, listeners. Right back at it. Number 10 cost you 221,000 contracts to break into the top 10. So that's not nothing. That shows there's still some decent amount of open paper in VIX, nearly 14 million contracts. That's nothing to sneeze at. That gets you to the SEP 25s, number 10. Number 9, our first of 2 puts, 236,000 of the SEP 13 puts, so the Meatball's favorite out there. Number 8, 240,000 of the SEP 24 calls. Number 7, 240,000 as well of the SEP 23, so maybe some vertical action lurking out there. We got a whole strip of 240,000. Number 6, 240,000 as well of the SEP 20s. And then number 5, also 240,000. So each of these is about a couple of hundred contracts more of the OC 20s. So interesting little call strip there. Number 4, about 250,000, 253,000 to be precise, of the no 47 halves. You know I love these listeners. They crack me up. Number 3, 264,000 of the SEP 60s. Again, the other half of that 1x3. Is that one going to pay? Probably not. I'll have to go check what they put that on for, if they were able to do it for a manageable cost or not. But the 60 leg, at least, of that doesn't seem like it's going to play ball here. Number 2, 267,000 of the D's 35s. And the number 1 size position in VIX options right now, probably not surprising. One of my favorite options on the board right now, 352,000 of the SEP 15 puts. So not surprising perhaps out there. We'll run through the list this week. Obviously a truncated holiday week and nothing really blowing the doors off. Today, looking the lightest of the bunch, only 239,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog today, such as it is, 25,000 of the SEP 25s. Number 2, 18,000 of the SEP 13 half puts. So the meatball's other favorite strike there. Number 3, 11,000 of the NOVE 25s. Number 4, 9,000 of the NOVE 17s. And rounding out the top 5 today on a pretty light day, about 9,000 as well of the SEP 14 puts. Yesterday, a little bit more paper on the tape, 489,000 contracts. You'd think with the way vol was moving yesterday, you think we'd have a little bit more action out there. But yeah, surprisingly light. The big dog out there, 28,000 of the OC 19s. Number 2, 25,000 of the D's 20s. So interesting strikes in months as well. Number 3, 25,000 of the October 19 puts. So a lot of love for that 19 strike in October yesterday. Number 4, 25,000 as well of the Jan 20s. And rounding out the top 5 yesterday, 17, almost 18,000 of the October 17 puts. Wednesday, similar level of paper, 434,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog on Wednesday, 29,000 of the SEP 13 half puts, followed by 28,000 of the SEP 14 puts, followed by 22,000 of the SEP 15 puts. Number 4, 19,000 of the SEP 14 half puts. Unless you think number 5 would also be a put. Nope, 19,000 of the D's 40s. Mixing it up there. Tuesday, a little bit more paper, 486,000 contracts on the tape. The big dog on Tuesday, 34,000 of the SEP 16 calls, followed by number 2, 20,000 of the OC 15 puts. Back to October again. Number 3, 20,000 as well of the October 12 and a half puts. Number 4, 18,000 of the September 14 half puts. And rounding out the top 5 on Tuesday, 16,000 of the September 15 puts. Mr. Meatball, obviously a truncated holiday trading week, not the most active week we've seen out there in VIX land. I think everyone may be still recovering from the Labor Day holiday out there. What, if anything, caught your eye in VIX options land this week, sir?
Yeah, you got some action today on the 25 calls, and a little bit of action on the 13 and a half puts for regular September today. No, really huge trades caught my eye this week. There were a lot last week, but nothing that really kind of punched me in the face and said, whoa, look at this. Just your usual, 10,000 lot call buys, and then a sprinkling of puts floating about.
Yeah, I'm with you. It wasn't anything that, as you put it, punched me in the face this week either. It's kind of your ho-hum week of post-holiday paper here. Mr. Bryan, anything catching your eye out there in VIX options this week? And then B, you're tackling and fielding a lot of options questions these days. Are you getting a lot of questions on the VIX options front, or did the dog days of summer were people up to something else?
Yeah, I actually have been talking a little bit more about the VIX. I've done a few more trades in the VIX options. And then once again, it's September, so people, I think just the seasonality of it brings up questions when we get into September, October. One of the biggest things that I do see on a lot of this volume is you're seeing that expiration on 9/20 showing up quite a bit, which is obviously the day before, or the day that the Fed starts kicking off their Fed meeting on that expiration. So interesting to see that there's so much volume in that particular expiration, and rightfully so. And the last trade that we saw a little bit on that October, I think we had an October put option that we were talking about that we saw on the 18th expiration. So those are some of the more popular expirations, and I do love that little December trade that we were talking about on that 40 strike call option. I just thought that was just a fun one to look at. So I never would have noticed that volume, so I love to see that was one of the more active trades of the week.
That's your newest trade recommendation, D's 40s. I can see it coming now, Brian.
I do like that.
Get all your hot D's 40 action. Just follow Brian on Twitter, and he'll lead you down the dark side of all the D's 40s you can get.
Yeah,
yeah, that one kind of stuck out to me as well. Of all the kind of middling trades, and especially on Tuesday when everything else was size puts, you got somebody slinging a whole bunch of the D's 40s. So yeah, that brought a smile to my face out there as well. You fan of D's 40s, listeners? You gonna load up on those? Perhaps if so, listen to some of our earlier shows, and maybe we'll lure you to some other higher probability paths. Speaking of higher probability, it's a pretty decent probability these days that SVIX is just going to keep going up. That's kind of what it's done for pretty much the entirety of the year. We mocked that person roundly who loaded up on all those SEP 35s, and those are within spitting distance right now. It was unched when we kicked off the show at 3170. It had since given up some of the ghost. It's down about 0.3 of a point to about 3140, but still net, not a huge move on the week. Let's see. How high did we get intra-week, listeners? 31 and roughly 3/4, 31.77. That was pretty much the high. It's a new all-time high out there as well, so every week, another new all-time high for SVIX. It's kind of just like clockwork at this point. But intriguing stuff. I know a lot of you have probably overwritten the hell out of this thing, so a lot of you are probably out, or if it keeps moving, certainly going to be out there. But still, intriguing stuff nonetheless. A little bit of paper on the tape today. 3,300 contracts. It may not sound like a lot, but when the ADBE is only 1,800 contracts and has fallen another 500 over the course of the past week, 3,300, actually a fair amount of paper. Let's look really quickly and see what folks are up to out there today. Looks like about 500 of the OC 31 puts, so going right to the fire there, and then 400 of the SEP 25 puts, and then 400 as well of the OC 32 puts. What's a 400 lots going up here? 400 as well of the SEP 26 puts. So a whole bunch of put fun going on out there in 400 lots in SVIX. Either way, it totals up to about 3,300 contracts today, which for a quiet Friday heading into a weekend, it's actually not a bad amount of paper, I should say. In terms of the size positions, what's open for size, you know what the big dog is. I just talked about it. The top position in SVIX still 2,410 of the SEP 35s. Will those actually pay off? Man, they've come so far. They've gotten so close. It would be a shame to see those wither and die on the vine. This close to the finish line. 2,300 of the SEP 10 puts, so again, the complete other side of the spectrum, and then 1,500 for number 3 of the D's 10 puts. Brian, I'm curious, I know when this launched, you were in the category of folks out there who were not a fan that they were bringing back inverse vol. I'm curious on your thoughts now that we got a little bit of time, a little bit of volume under our belts out there. And what are your thoughts on the fact that, there was all this hoopla, all this Sturm und Drang about, they're bringing back inverse vol, how dare they? And yet, still, all this time later, it hasn't really caught on, at least from a volume perspective, sir.
Right, and that's I found it interesting that we actually got some volume in it today, and I think that you've summed it up. It's not a product that I want to be trading in, mainly because of volume and bid-ask spreads and trying to get good, solid executions inside those trades. I've never been a huge fan of it, and unless that volume goes up tenfold, then that would be about the only time I might consider it. And I'd have to have really good markets to look into it. The product's available. I don't know. I don't want to be trading in on it. I don't actually look at it that often. So I guess we'll just leave it there, Mark. I think that's pretty straightforward.
Mr. Meatball, I know you've been overwriting some stuff out there in SVIX. Is that still the case? What are you slinging out there in SVIX land right now?
Yeah. I'm a little annoyed with myself that I didn't buy it again when it got into the mid-20s, but I'm long it against short some calls. It's been a nice little overwrite. Going to make some real decent dough on that.
Nice.
Everyone always wants the best entry and exit, right? Everyone's always like, I shoulda, woulda, coulda. out there. It's a dangerous game out there, Mr. Meatball. I don't know what game they're playing with with UVIX. I think they're just letting this thing go off the rails out here. 290 right now, unchanged on the week. The ADBE is going in the wrong direction, as you would expect. The underlying itself is almost an option at this point. It's down about another 3,000 contracts. Worth noting, there's 8,000 contracts on the tape today, so something is going up out there. Looks like some people are overriding the heck out of the 2.5 calls expiring on the 22nd, doing that 3,000 times, looks like. Yeah, 3,200 times. So they sold them for 55 cents, but it's not getting me super excited. I guess they're just washing their hands of this thing. They know it's going. Man, I guess if it drops off to 2.5 by that expiration, which is a good probability, then they pocket that and they do it all again. But at that point, you also have to wonder, why you're still holding on to this thing. All sorts of madness out there. I'm assuming that's an overwrite. But weird stuff. The big position out there, 9,500 of the SEP 4 halves expiring today. So, spoiler alert, those don't seem to be poised to work out. But hey, hopefully you overwrote the hell out of those. In terms of a product that does a little bit more paper, let's go on out to UVXY. Was at 14 even when we kicked off the show. Literally unched on the week. It's up to about 14.15 right now. So not exactly blowing the doors off out there from a net movement perspective. Also not blowing the doors off from a volume perspective. The ADB, like everything else this week, moving in the wrong direction. 134,000 contracts. That's down another 14,000 contracts from this time last week. Doesn't seem like today is really going to change things too much. About 79,000 contracts on the tape out there today. Let's look at the top positions out there in UVXY. Let's do a top 3 out here as well. Actually, this is the same problem we had before. These are all pre-split adjusted. So we have the 8s and the 55s and a whole bunch of weirdo strikes out, and the 2s. So not a lot of information to be gleaned in those highly illiquid positions right now. The big dog out there today, what people are trading out there today, such as it is 5,600 of the 14 halves that go out today, followed by 5,300 of the 14s also expiring today, and 3,500 of the 14 puts. So once again, all the action is on expiration day. Mark, we talk a lot about 0 day and the index and everything else, but we've been saying for a long time on this show that folks just love to go right into the fire. They were doing 0 day before it was cool on a ton of these vol products, sir. That's just the way it is. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you get a day where vol is in and people think it's just going to continue to collapse, and they take these little cheap shots at names like, UVXY and VXX and SVIX to keep some vol momentum, and they play it and they go after it. It's always impressive the amount of volume that this thing gets on expiration day.
Another reason why SVIX could benefit from a weekly. I know they're not going to do it because it doesn't have the volume yet, but it's the catch-22. You don't get the volume till you add the weekly, but you won't add the weekly till you have the volume. So someone's got to blink out there. But right now, no one's blinking. No one's doing much out there in SVIX land. Brian, we talked about SVIX. Any of these other vol ETPs come across your radar? You have your ever-eroding UVIX. You have your UVXY, which is doing a similar dance, but at a higher level. And of course, so we're getting to VXX in a little bit. Any of these come on your radar, sir?
Yeah, VXX is probably the one that I get questions on the most, and I would look at the most and consider actually trading more often than any of the other products that are out there. My favorite is still obviously just the VIX, just the volume, and I still remember going all the way back to the days when I was in the retail markets committee at the CBOE and asking about VIX products, and I'm like, well, it's going to be a very confusing product, and I'm amazed that the volume and how well that it has done. I didn't think that a lot of our clients would become astute enough to really understand how the futures work in that. And I think with the VXX, people feel a little bit more comfortable with it. There's still a little bit of confusion in that product, but I get more questions on it. I think more often you'll see people come on in and trade that underlying than any of the others, as far as, my years in the brokerage industry.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. Of course, over the past year, it had some hiccups, so some folks dialing it back, but they seem like they're getting back into it again, even though the ADB out here continuing to come in. as everything was this past week, listeners. Holiday week, that's going to happen. 75,000 contracts a day. That's going up in VXX right now, down about 9,000 from this time last week. VXX right now, actually, when we kicked off the show, is at about 21. And right now, still at about a 21, maybe a 21.10 or so. So not much going on. Pretty much unched on the week out there as well. That's our theme for the week, listeners. Vol is unched across the board. In terms of action, there's about 56,000 contracts on the tape today, so it seems like it's probably going to hit that already kind of muted ADB. Again, a far cry from what it used to be when it used to rival VIX options and actually exceed VIX volume some days. Not going to be doing that anytime soon, and probably not ever again, quite frankly, given the myriad trust issues that linger around this product. But still, we can all pine for the heady days of yesterday here on the show. In terms of size positions, what's the big dog out there? Go figure, it's all puts in VXX listens. Number 3, we have 15,000 of the SEP 23 puts. Number 2, 22,000 of the SEP 22 puts. And the number 1 size position in VXX, 32,000 of the SEP 20 puts. So if past is prologue, that's folks just loading up on a whole boatload of downside out there in VXX. Seems like they're up to that today because they said a decent amount of paper out there today for heading into a quiet holiday week. 56,000 contracts on the tape. Seems like nearly 12,000 of the SEP 22 puts have gone up. Paper buying a bunch of those earlier this morning. Looks like for prices around $1.15 in that range. So they bought those this morning. They're not looking too terrible. Intriguing stuff out there. Mr. Meatball, I know you've been playing again in all things VXX. Anything catching your eye out there this week, sir?
Yeah, I mean, this is why you have to, if you're going to trade it, you have to be very quick with it. It got a nice little pop and then is now right back where it started, right back at $21. I mean, it really did. I mean, it was $21 on, it closed $21 on the 21.21 on Friday. We had a really nice pop in vol. It got all the way up to 22.70 and is right back and is actually lower than where it was last Friday. Despite the market being significantly lower than where we had closed on Friday. So, just you've got to be nimble. You got to be nimble. You got to be named Jack.
Yeah, you can't sit on this stuff, unfortunately. You can't wait for vol views to come on and listen and then do it, because at that point, usually, unfortunately, listeners, it is too late. Is it too late to sling earnings, vol? Well, you missed a lot of the big names, but there's still some stuff popping off. This week, of course, bit of a quiet week. Not many big names popping off on a holiday truncated week, listeners, unless you're really excited about GameStop or Dave & Buster's or Kroger popping off this morning. Luckily for you, we have hot off the presses from our friends over there at Orat's Land, some updated earnings move results and season and trades and all sorts of fun reports. You can check these out for yourselves. You know where to go. theoptionsinsider.com. Click on the Options News and Articles tab. You can find all this fun stuff for yourselves completely for free because we love you folks out there. We love giving you reams upon reams of free data. We also give you the daily most actives and in midday and all kinds of stuff to arm yourself as a trader out there. So if you want that stuff, of course, visit the website. Follow us on Twitter. We put all that stuff out there as well. And we mentioned Dave & Buster's and GameStop. Those were both popping off on the 6th after the bell. Dave & Buster's going into their announcement, they were $37.40. They were pricing in 9.3%, so they were pricing in a fair bit of juice, and they ended up delivering about 3.1%. So this has kind of been a bit of a theme, a lot of underperformance in some of these big names. Now, of course, we say it before, we'll say it again. We measure this immediately after the announcement. You have to set the cutoff somewhere, listen. You can't just track them endlessly for days. If you held on to Dave & Buster's, till the end of the week, it's trading about $34.60. So it's down about $2.80 now. So it probably has outperformed that straddle now at that point. But in the immediate blush, it wasn't looking that great. So again, this is all a frame of reference game at the end of the day, listeners. GameStop, same deal, 18 3/4 going into their announcement. They were pricing in 12.4%, and same deal. They dramatically underperformed as well. They delivered 2.8%. Now, if you waited a little bit, they're at about $17.70 right now, so they've come off about $1 out there as well. So again, it's all frame of reference out here. How long are you going to hold these things? But we can only measure the immediate kind of post-vol crush. And that's kind of what we're looking for, really, as well. We want to see how much earnings juice there is in it, not a bunch of other fluff. We want to see the real earnings juice and how much comes out when these events happen. So that's kind of what we're measuring here for you listeners. Looking ahead a little bit, there's still some names popping off. We've got Oracle coming up next week. 124 and the third is where they were when we ran this report. They're popping off on the 11th, listeners. They're pricing in nearly $6. In the past, they've moved about 5.25. So it's a fair amount of extra juice for Oracle, not known to be the sexiest of names out there on the earnings front. If you're excited about Adobe, they're the 14th after the bell. 562 is where they were trading when we ran this report. They were pricing in $29.50. In the past, they moved about 22. My goodness, $7.50 worth of extra juice. That's nothing to sneeze at. I'm gonna have to go take a look at Adobe, see what they're pricing in on the horizon there. Is Adobe going to go all AI? Seems like it from that straddle, listeners. In terms of the season, hanging out right now at about 102%. So slight outperformance. We were at 98% a week or two ago, which is actually our long-term average. We've been crunching these numbers for years now, and the long-term average is back up to about 98%. So we were at it last week. Now we're slightly exceeding it. Will we settle out of that level? Probably somewhere right around par, listeners, if past is prologue. Brian, I know you watch a lot of earnings names, and you probably field a lot of questions out there during earnings season. Any earnings names or earnings trades really resonate or stand out to you this cycle, sir?
The biggest one that was recent, you talked about Kroger, and we mentioned Walmart, is what happened to Dollar General? I actually got short did some long put spreads going into their earnings and after their earnings. And one of the biggest things is, it was a darling during the COVID times, and they've given all that back and actually given some poor guidance, and if you were thinking about the economy in this day and age and all the talks of soft landings, recession possibilities still kind of lingering a little bit, to see Dollar General just get beat up like that, to me, that was one of the more interesting ones. And it was just right at a precipice going right into earnings, which I also see on Adobe. On Adobe, the stock is at a very interesting point. Obviously, it's gone straight up. And a lot of the talk is, as you mentioned, AI. But if you look back at the chart going back, to 2019, right in this little area is where there's a lot of noise. There was a gap down, gap up. So I think it'll be a real interesting earnings report for Adobe. I'll be watching that one, probably do a trade on it on Options Guy TV next week, just because earnings are always kind of fun to speculate on a little bit and talk about on the show, because you learn a lot about the pricing.
Yeah, they're pricing in some juice.
Those are the two big ones.
They're pricing in some juice in Adobe. I'm going to have to pay more attention to that one out there as well. Mr. Meatball, I know you're always crunching flow and looking at different things when you're not talking to us here on Vol Views. Anything catching your eye or really standing out to you from an earnings vol or earnings trade perspective this cycle, sir?
Yeah, I mean, Dollar General did get absolutely smoked on its last earnings. That was ugly. Not a ton of earnings have been overly impactful to the market as a whole, but you're seeing little nuggets of retail. Retail really did not have a good season. Outside of Walmart and Amazon, that was kind of the big takeaway. And I think the overarching theme for this earnings season was, if you got a big rally leading into your earnings, it was very, very, very difficult to then have anything positive come out of the earnings. It was already priced in. We saw names like Apple, Microsoft, NVIDIA that had really nice runs, unable to get any traction out of their earnings.
Well, let's see if we can get some traction out of your questions, listeners. It's time for a little bit of the old volatility voicemail.
It's time to share your thoughts and opinions with your fellow volatility traders. It's time to check the volatility voicemail. Make your voice heard by dialing 779-669-4VOL. Posting a comment on the optionsinsider.com, sending an email to questions@theoptionsinsider.com, or posting your questions to twitter.com/options or facebook.com/theoptionsinsider.
All right, everybody, welcome to your segment, the Vol voicemail segment. Oh, Brian, you'll like this. I know you're a resident Packers fan. Our chat is debating right now Bears versus Green Bay this week and debating which side to take on the spread. Are you all in on the big game this week, Mr. Brian? I know you're a cheesehead. We'll forgive you for that, sir.
Well, yeah, obviously there's a lot of question marks, just like what's going on with the VIX right now with the Packers. So it's going to be a tough season, but I'm a true to heart fan and definitely will be watching the game. But it's a little tough because Justin Fields is actually my quarterback in my fantasy league of record.
Yes.
So a little mixed emotions going there.
See, I used to have Aaron Rodgers in mind a lot. So, yeah, it does give you mixed emotions of who you're cheering for out there. Speaking of which, yeah, it's fantasy season. We did do a fun poll. We did a fun little holiday poll. Question of the week, Brian, just because it was a short week and we like to have fun on the holiday. Going with your fantasy football theme, we asked, hey, who are you picking first overall for your squad this year? We had 4 choices, Brian. Justin Jefferson, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, or Jamar Chase. And who are you picking while I go see who our audience picks, sir?
Who would I pick out of those?
Who would you pick first out of all those? While I find,
I guess I would have to go with Justin Jefferson. It would depend on the league a little bit, but they went first overall in most of the leagues. In our league, it did, and it has a little bit to do with half point PPR and that. But he's just done it repeatedly over and over again. I don't know if the Vikings are going to really make a run for it. Their quarterback always seems to choke when he's most when he's needed. But I think that would be the one I'd go for. But yeah, I do have a little interesting anecdote that I can add to this real quick.
Go for it.
A betting little thing is that Justin Fields was actually the most money for the MVP out in Vegas this year went on Justin Fields.
Yeah, that's crazy. I saw that, yes.
Yeah, that's weird. That was and it was part of the reason why I actually decided to target him. And, obviously it deals with the odds. They're just saying that the odds are worth the risk on it. But, yeah, I thought that was a real interesting little tidbit.
Brian's been on me, listeners, for ages to do a fantasy football show on the network. By the way, Justin Jefferson, he tied with Christian McCaffrey, both 40% in our poll, Brian.
All right.
Kind of interesting there. But, yeah, one day, Brian, you and I, we've been talking about it. We're going to get Mr. Meatball. Are you down? Would you do a fantasy football show?
Of course I would do a fantasy football show. Right. I love fantasy football.
There we go. We got 3. We got 3 people now. I asked a bunch of people, and they were all too intimidated by the prospect. You think a bunch of veteran options traders, Brian,
bunch of weenies,
would jump at the chance to apply their options knowledge on a new frontier, perhaps with a wagering context attached to it. And then we go out to like DraftKings and say, hey, what are you doing? And instead, no, they all chickened out. So, so at least we got 3 of us. Maybe we'll do a belated fantasy football run here. Would you be down for that, listeners? It's kind of intriguing. Looks like we got a nice contentious battle, Pack versus Bears, in our chat. Let's get out to our questions right now. We asked you last week which product had the largest overall impact on the options market: VIX, weeklies, daily options / 0 DTE, or other. Dailies ran away with it. 53% of you choosing that. 32% only for VIX. I thought it would be higher for VIX given the legacy that VIX has. Daily, kind of a new player on the scene. And then weeklies coming in third at 15.1% out there. This is kind of interesting. Mr. Meatball, we were talking about this on our Options Bootcamp show. I think it was about a week or 2 ago. And we were talking about some vol products out there on that show. And some of those listeners, they're usually a little bit more entry-level options traders. Were intrigued by that. And we had this one listener, Theta Noob. Back in July, we were talking about VIX products and ETFs and everything. He said this prompted me to look into those products, and he decided to test a leap put. I believe this is in UVXY. So he bought a leap in UVXY, and he's managing it with a front expiration, as he puts it, short put. So he's legging into a year-long calendar spread in UVXY, sir. What are your thoughts? You like that setup, Mr. Meatball?
It's an interesting one, to say the least.
Yeah, it's kind of struck me as interesting, too. You don't see usually that degree of separation in your calendars in UVXY. I've seen people come out and just load up for long term in some of these, That seemed like that trade has kind of gone away a little bit. It seems like just because it got so crowded for a while. Everyone and their mother liked it. And I don't know if I would pick UVXY now, too, for, obvious reasons, given all the issues that one. And the fact that they do such anemic reverse splits? I guess that's a good corollary question. If you had to go out and do the old set it and forget it put, Mr. Meatball, right now, in one of these vol ETPs, where are you leaning? You leaning VXX?
I mean, to go short?
Yeah, to go the long-term fade. Kind of you buy the put, set it and forget it, check it in like a year.
Well, a post-reverse split, you'd go UVIX, but in the current environment, believe it or not, I might even go VXX just because it has the most juice to it. I know UVXY loses more as a percent, but with it at $14 and VXX having a 50% higher price, you might actually make more money being short VXX.
That's what I thought. It's got more juice for the squeeze. Of course, you have a 5 to 10 delta of some nonsense happening that wipes out your entire trade over the course of the next year. So you got to price that in if you're doing that. And you're right. I mean, UVIX might be the obvious call, but what they've done with the reverse split, probably not. And I don't know if I love this 1 year calendar, but it's an interesting approach. Who is this Theta New? We'll probably get into this more on Options Bootcamp. That's where you sent this question. And Brian, you like the notion of a long-term put in any of these eroding assets, your VXXs, your UVXYs, your UVIXs, and then turning around and trying to finance it with maybe a weekly or monthly put you're selling against it?
Well, my issue would be what if you got to roll it, like the liquidity to be able to adjust that trade. And I think that would be my biggest issue. And not to mention whatever you had to pay to buy. I have no idea what that spread would have been on that long-term put. So those would be my issues. And those are the issues that I just kind of chatted about here on the show today. Just in general. Let's
go to this one from LTM. See how many of you folks we can squeeze in here. You guys are always so nice, send in so many questions. LTM wants to know, do you think we'll see 0-day VIX options anytime soon? Well, I will say this. They didn't launch 1-day VIX for their health. That said, I don't know if that's kind of the gangbusters approach and product that they that they were hoping it was going to be. I mean, we effectively have it, obviously with expiration now and the weeklies in VIX. But I don't know, Mr. Meatball, everyone's obsessed with 0-day. You think we're going to have nonstop, everyday 0 DTE VIX anytime soon?
Never. Never going to happen.
Never, he says. Just throwing cold water all over everybody, sir.
Sorry, it is not going to happen.
I would not want to be a market maker in that pit, trying to figure those things out.
No liquidity there. It's never going to. No one will want to trade it. There's just no way. Not a chance.
I think it has been eye-opening, some of the performance of that 1-day VIX, too. Like, second half of the day, things get a little wonky out there. You're right. I don't think anyone wants to make tons of markets for size on that stuff. So, yeah, there's a lot to I don't know if I'll ever say never, because a profit potential always will drive something. Someone will probably take some sort of stab at it, but I don't think your question is soon. I don't think we're going to see it soon, there, MTA. But I won't be as definitive as the Meatball. I will never say never when there's a profit potential for an exchange somewhere. They will attempt it some way, shape, or form. Let's go out to Chain 3. I like your handle. He says, hello. Well, hello to you. He says, just checking to see if the Vol Pros know of any good crypto volatility products out there. Seems like an untapped market with Bitcoin and ETH, both trading anywhere from 2x to 3x VIX levels. And I mean from a Vol perspective, I think. Keep talking Vol. Yeah, there are a couple. The one we talked about the most, he's been on the show a bunch of times, is Simon Ho's product from T3. He has BitVol. It did trade for a little bit on the, shall we say, much bemoaned FTX US derivatives, formerly LedgerX. We all know what happened to that. That is now part of MyX, I do believe. I think that's approved. So I do think we'll be seeing that product come back to fruition again in some way, shape, or form. So if you want to learn more about that, then check out BitVol. And we just had the folks from Deribit. They're, of course, the world's leading crypto derivatives exchange. They were on our crypto rundown program a few weeks ago, and they were all hyped up about their new product as well. DVOL, they call it. It's effectively their Bitcoin VIX. This is Deribit Implied Volatility Index. It's like more of a variance type approach than what you're seeing out here in some of these other vol products. But it is interesting, and it does exist. So I don't know, tradable is still the big question mark, and BitVol was mostly OTC, wasn't like very liquid, and I think you have liquidity issues here as well. I'll have to go see exactly what they're trading on the DVOL, but I do know they disseminate it. Brian or Mark, anything to add here on the world of crypto volatility products, gentlemen?
Well, it's beyond my scope, so I'll pass that over to Mark.
They've tried volatility products in just about everything, and none of them seem to catch on. Crypto might be the one where it makes sense because it's so wonky, and vol really does move around in there. So could be interesting. But if you look around, they've tried to do vol in gold. They've tried to do vol in bonds. They've tried to do vol in the NASDAQ, all of which makes some sense. And no one has traded them.
Yeah, I thought when they had Apple VIX, it was going to be a huge hit, and these things can surprise you what resonates out there. Speaking of surprises, listeners, it's time for the most surprising segment. It is time for the Crystal Ball.
It's time to peer into the future and reveal what the volatility gods hold in store. It's time to look into the Crystal Ball.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crystal Ball, the portion of the show where we attempt to wrestle with the vol gods. And you know what, listeners? I got so distracted with your questions. We're running a little bit late. But it actually seems to be working out because I was at 1355 at my prediction this week, and we're at right about a 1365, 1367. So give it 2 seconds, and it's going to tick in my favor. The meatball was at 13 and a quarter. So that's the rock lobster. So no joy for him. Queen, 1340, looking pretty good. We had a bunch of 14 handles, 13. Not bad, Frank. 1380 as well. We got some other listener cues in there, listener guesses. Our producers will go through all of them. If you win, you will hear from us with your fabulous prizes. All right, so I'm going to take look at that. Bam! I'll take a nice bullseye for that one this week. So that's the nice thing about VIX being unched and you're leaning somewhat unched. It ends up working out. All right, that means I get to choose whether I want to go first or last. You know what? I'm going to go last. We'll give our guest pride of place. Mr. Options guy, sir. What are you feeling for this time next week from a VIX perspective?
Well, the whole show, my theme has been that I think the VIX should be higher. So I'm going to take a leap of faith. And I think I'm going to look a little bit at what I see here on the 20-day moving average, right around the 15. Let's go 1501.
Ooh, look at you, 1501.
Yeah,
bringing the juice back.
I need it more than I want to admit.
You're talking your book. I like it. You're talking your book now. I wouldn't hate a 15 handle. We'll see. I got to close out my puts first, so let me know before that happens. But Mr. Meatball, what do you got for this time next week, sir?
1221.
1221. He's ready right off the bat with the pound.
I'm taking the other side of Brian. I'm taking the other side of Brian. I'll sell you your calls, Brian.
That's what I figured, yeah.
Yeah, I have a hard time prognosticating a 12 handle because, it gives me kind of the shakes. So I'm going to say we're going to be just a bit above it, just a bit outside, 1305 for me. That's your mark at this time. Listeners, that music means we've come to the end of the show. I'll be back in a little bit with options oddities, so stay tuned for that if you're on the pro side. If you're on the on-demand side, that will conclude your broadcast week with us. Thank you for joining us. But before we go, Mr. Meatball, if folks want more action on the land of the pit, where should they go? What should they do?
Go to optionpit.com. We're putting out content that you want to see every day. Come and check us out.
Check them out, optionpit.com. And Mr. Overby, if folks want to check out all of your goodies over there, maybe in the land of the Twitter, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, in Twitter, it's very simple. It's at my name, at Brian Overby. And I started a new podcast over with the help of Tradier. Actually, hub.tradier. You can see Options Guy TV. And on the 20th, I'm going to have a friend of your show, Mark. Russell Rhodes is going to be chatting with me a little bit about volatility heading into the Fed meeting. So check it out.
That bastard. He's not allowed to do any appearances outside of my network. He knows this. That's violating his contract. He'll be hearing from my lawyers.
I might have thrown him under the bus.
He'll be hearing from my lawyers post-haste. All right, listeners. That is going to do it for us here on the network. Hope for all of you on-demand folks, you have a great week. For all you pro folks, hang out. We'll be back in a little bit with Options Oddities. Then we're all back again on Monday for the option block all the way through to next Friday. Another episode of Volatility Views. Stay safe out there, everybody.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.